When kids just won't listen, parents often feel stuck between two choices: to give in or get angry. It's exhausting. We give you the top techniques directly from the experts, helping you on your path to a more peaceful, respectful, and joyful life with your kids. Today, Sarah Moore is stopping by the show. She is a published writer and the founder of Dandelion Seeds Positive Parenting. She also works alongside best-selling parenting author Elizabeth Pantley, and she is certified by the Raffi Foundation for child honoring, which we talk a little bit about in the show. She spent a year observing teacher Tom, who is a leading practitioner of democratic play-based education. And in our conversation, she also shared her experience with a forest school and her strategies in connecting with kids using play and nonverbal communication. Before you listen to this episode, you might be interested in checking out my interview with someone very close to Sarah, the first child to be interviewed here. But let's get back to Sarah. She has a lot of great experience and insight to share with us. So let's start the show. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
My first and favorite question: what is it that you love most about working with kids?
That is such a great question. I love their purity, their natural joy, their natural enthusiasm for life. And I think it is so much of what adults lack that it's really refreshing to be around these joyful little human beings and go back to that place of just pure enjoyment of life.
Yeah, I'm with you. And you've worn a lot of different hats and have a wide variety of experience working with kids. Is there a main thing that you've learned from them?
Yes. One of the main things that I have learned from them is that they will always show you exactly what they need. A lot of times as adults, we really spend a lot of time in our own heads thinking, what does this child need? What do I need to do? What's the right way to approach this situation? But if we slow down and pay attention to them, they are fantastic teachers, and they'll show us exactly what they need from us. And actually, I can continue on that for a second.
Yeah, please. I'm curious.
Sure. Yeah. I really, and what it comes down to there is that the most important thing that I think all of us, big or small, but particularly small people who are new to the world, is that the best way to connect with a kid is to think like a kid. You know, we all want connection, big or small, but if we want to connect with a child, we need to think like they do. And rather than using our adult logic in different situations, we should really get curious about where they're coming from. In fact, a really good mantra from another parenting expert who's a friend of mine, and she taught me, don't get mad, get curious. And when we take that approach and, just go into any sort of parenting or child leadership role, wondering about what's going on in their mind and how we're supposed to learn from them about what they need, that's the most important thing we can take away from the relationship with them as far as what they need from us.
Yeah, and getting curious is thinking like a kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, of the many environments that you've worked with kids in, we talked about were you calling it a forest school or just an outdoor school?
We've actually done both. I did attend and participated in a forest school, and then we did another school that wasn't officially a forest school because it had a dedicated play space, but at least 50 to 75% of the time was spent outdoors. So it was a wonderful, consistent environment where the kids could be outside in a semi-natural environment, but still have the benefit of a full outdoor experience.
So can you describe what that looks like to someone who has never seen a forest school? The kids are out there doing their homework in the dirt, or how does that look? How many kids,
Sure.
what ages, and what does it look like?
Sure. For the forest school specifically, there were probably about 15 to 20 children, and there were ample adults. I would say at least one adult per every 3 children. Some weeks there were more, depending on if parents wanted to go or not. And basically, the teacher would bring along a couple of big picnic blankets and designate a meeting point. He or she would have laid out the picnic blankets ahead of time so everybody knew where to congregate when they arrived. And usually the day would start with a craft of some sort, usually related to what we'd be exploring in the great outdoors. And sometimes not. Sometimes it would be things like, let's decorate a walking stick. So we've got some really heavy-duty sticks over here and ribbons and all sorts of things to adorn the stick with, and the kids would just start by getting their hands on the materials, putting together a walking stick, and then going on a big, long hike through the woods, stopping to learn about the various creatures or trees or edible plants or whatever it was that was out there. And at some logical point, usually when kids might be starting to get hungry or tired, and this was a fairly young age group, by the way. This was probably, I would say, 3 to 7 or 8 or so. And at about the time that everybody was getting a little bit tired out, it would be a great time for story time and snack and learning. So we'd pull up a stump and sit down and spend some time outside hearing about a story, usually related to the theme of the day. And the kids could really absorb not only the words they were hearing, but it was more of a multi-sensory experience to appreciate firsthand what they were learning about.
With a 1 to 3 parent to child ratio, this is like a homeschooling type of thing.
This one was optional. There were some kids who were homeschooled. Other kids were in mainstream school, but happened to have the flexibility in their schedule based on the session that they attended to be able to do it as an extracurricular.
And how many hours, is this going on? How many hours in a week would a kid spend out in that environment?
Sure. There were all sorts of different options. I think some of the classes might have been up to maybe 4 hours long, particularly for some of the older kids. For the younger kids, an hour or 2.
And that's meeting once a week, or how?
Yeah, for the little kids, once a week. For the older kids, they actually did have sessions that ran 5 days a week. So these kids could be outdoors in nature every day if they wanted to.
Do you have an example of a kid in that kind of environment who's challenging the rules, the norms, the boundaries that the adults are insisting on, and how was that handled?
Sure. I'm actually going to kind of combine 2 scenarios for the sake of the illustration.
Sure.
But there was a little boy who was 5, and we were in sort of a smaller group setting outdoors, and this little boy was struggling. His mama was not with him that day. He was missing her. He was really in a tough place emotionally, and it was coming out in all sorts of different behaviors. At one point, he picked up a really big, really heavy stick, and he started wielding it around as if it were a sword. and spinning around with it. And he was getting really close to a lot of the other children. And he started yelling and drawing enough attention to himself that kids were starting to gather around him, as were some of the adults. And honestly, it was a little bit scary because you could tell he was really dysregulated, and you could tell he really wanted to get some of his stress out, but he didn't know how to do it in a healthy way. So instead, his yell.
Sorry for the technical difficulties there. No idea what happened.
No problem.
You were saying that the kid is swinging a big heavy stick.
Yes.
He's dysregulated, and he's trying to get his energy out in a way that's starting to become scary to you and some of the others.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So what's next? How'd you handle it?
Sure. So basically, he had drawn quite the crowd. Many members of the crowd were little enough that they didn't necessarily have the life experience to know we need to stay away from that stick that he's flailing. So what one of the very wise adults did in the group is she decided to see if she could play him out of it, kind of get into his playful nature and channel his energy that way. So she reached forward anytime his back was turned to her, and she would temporarily grab onto the stick. And he'd get confused by why did the stick stop swinging as I was flailing it around. And he'd turn around and look at her, and she would do that thing where she would, look up and kind of pretend to whistle, and and he was still mad, but he was a little bit confused then. So he spun around again, and she briefly grabbed the stick, and same thing, oh no, it wasn't me. And she ended up being able to diffuse the situation in a way where it completely changed his emotional energy. And there didn't need to be any punishment. There didn't need to be any taking away of the stick. There didn't need to be any adult intervention of force in the old authoritarian way. It was just...
Didn't need to use the tasers.
Exactly. No tasers necessary. Exactly. And eventually he just sort of dropped the stick and ran off to go do his own thing with a totally different mood. And it was the perfect way to diffuse what could have been a very dangerous situation.
Interesting. And I was interested in how you said that, you didn't have to take the stick and go lock it in your trunk. It's like you're in a forest, so kids having access to sticks is part of the nature of it.
Yes, nice pun.
So yeah, finding a way to kind of incorporate it into something appropriate or healthy or not gonna injure anybody. That's a nice move.
Exactly. Yeah, play is almost always a solution. As the child psychologist Jean Piaget said, play is the work of childhood. And as you know, I firmly believe that it's the best way we can work with our children to help them cooperate.
Yeah, it's a way of like you said earlier, kind of understanding them and speaking their language. Oh, you said thinking like them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's both.
Is there a way to summarize the technique for someone whose first instinct is not to play, for someone who has difficulty getting curious or thinking like a kid? What would be the first step for someone who's new to kind of trying that out?
That's a great question, because frankly, as adults, most of us have sort of gotten past our, the prime of our playing years, and we're into our thinking and problem solving years. So it really takes conscious effort to get back to a totally different mindset than we've probably had in a really long time. So the best thing an adult can do in the moment, if they're even vaguely aware, I need to be handling this somehow, but I'm not sure how to get into a playful spirit. I'm not sure what the best thing is to do. Best thing is to do in that moment is just be still, be quiet, get down on the child's level and just observe for a couple of minutes. Almost anything, unless it's a major safety hazard of some sort, almost anything can wait for just a minute while we, get low to the ground, get to their level, be still, observe, and just be present with them. And in that presence with them, we sort of automatically tap into what's going on with them emotionally, and it helps us relate better. And from that relational connection, it helps us understand what they need and how we can communicate in a way that's really going to speak to their heart.
I was just curious, what do you think it is about getting on their level? And when there's times when that's, when you're outdoors and they're running around, they're not always within reach, or I'm just wondering about that kind of the specifics of getting on their level and when that works, how that works. And
Sure. You're right. Sometimes it is really logistically tricky. It's not like you're sitting in the living room and you can just move from couch to floor. If you're outside, let's say you're in a backyard or, at a beach or in a forest or whatever the case may be, and you need to still somehow get into the child's not only physical space, but also the child's emotional space. A lot of us as adults somehow assume that there is this force field around the child where we can't actually physically take part in whatever they're experiencing. But we, most of us have the good fortune of having legs that can move into their space and get close to them. We think we need to have this physical distance, but we don't. We can get up and get over to where the child is, put a hand on a shoulder if the child is comfortable with that, and if it's appropriate, get down on a knee and get into that child's physical space. It doesn't matter if you're in a living room or in the middle of a forest. You can always get close to the child, move your body if you need to, and find that physical connection. And, through that touch, especially, touch is an amazing connection point. Obviously, not only from a physical standpoint, but also emotionally. And suddenly it doesn't matter what situation you're surrounded by, what the physical environment is, the two of you are now a unit where you can start communicating regardless of your location.
so those are a lot of tips before one's even opened their mouth, where you're talking about taking a moment, refraining from jumping in, getting on their level, watching with curiosity to try to see it from their perspective, or see what you might have missed from across the room, or even in another room. You hear kids yelling about something, and you just I don't know about you, but I just assume the worst so often. And you come in and it's like they're playing peacefully. My heart's racing. Sometimes it's hard not to react even when things are fine.
Yes, exactly. It's that old, we assume particularly, too much noise, totally suspicious. Silence, downright terrifying. And I walked into silence the other day thinking I might be walking into something that I might not want to see. And my child was folding towels. And I thought, okay, never mind. Go on. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's natural, normal part of existence, I believe.
Exactly.
And then you talked about touch. When you're on the child's level, is that, there's a million ways to do it. Is it grab them by the wrist? Is it pat them on the back? What does it normally look like when you're trying to set that foundation to start the communication?
That is a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. This is something really interesting. We as humans get so much benefit from touch. It naturally produces, the hormones and the chemicals in our body that reduce stress. So we naturally seek out touch. Something interesting we can do with a child who's dysregulated is get physically close to the child, but certainly never touch them in a way that's going to create more anxiety and more dysregulation. It's never an aggressive touch. It's never a domineering touch. Sometimes, particularly if a child is really dysregulated, the best thing we can do is go and sit right next to the child on the floor. And it might be something like, kind of like that first date awkward, oh, our shoulders are touching. I wonder if this means we might hold a hand. You can kind of take that same psychology with the child. Just, make touch available to them. And kids almost invariably will show you the type of touch they're comfortable with. It might be, oh my goodness, and all of a sudden the child just plopped into my lap. Or the child collapsed in a pile of tears in a hug, or whatever the child is comfortable with. But, coming in from below, so to speak, an arm around the waist or something that just is naturally unobtrusive is much more effective in connecting with kids than coming in from a place of dominance, like I'm coming down from a hug or for a hug, or I'm swooping down to pick you up. Something that doesn't feel like a physical affront of some sort.
I was talking to my friend Stream Buggy earlier, and she said the first thing that sounded like came to her mind about how this works when you're working with a kid who's having a hard time is she said, you're telling the kid that you're here for them. And I'm wondering if when you have a kid who's, I'll just say, misbehaving, need for connection, or they're just feeling left out or feeling whatever, not connected. And so by kind of getting on their level and, those other nonverbal approaches you talked about, you're sending that message of like, I'm here for you. And that's clear to them without, before you've even opened your mouth.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all just really want to connect. We all want to be invited to share our hearts. And in that example that she touched on earlier today, the little girl who was not doing what the ballet teacher wanted her to do and who was subsequently put in timeout, when I went over to her, I sat her down next to me. Actually, I asked her if I could sit down with her, and she nodded, sort of hesitantly, because an adult had just put her in timeout. So, given that I'm an adult, she wasn't quite sure if I was on their team or her team. But she said it was okay if I sat down, and I waited, and I said what I observed. I said, you seem pretty upset today. And immediately she launched into some really pretty big problems she was having at home. She was feeling like her brother was getting treated so much better than she was. And her mommy had just been out of town for her grandma's funeral, and she was missing her mommy. And where did grandma go? And, all of a sudden, this little 7-year-old girl was pouring her heart out. And the thing is, her concerns and her heart were in need of nurturing just as much as any other adults would be. And really, she just needed somebody to listen for a couple of minutes. And after 3 minutes of talking, she looked at me, she gave me a hug, she said thank you, and she got up and she was ready to join class again. And in that moment, the last thing she needed was the alienation of a timeout, because, she was a little girl who was struggling. What she didn't need was further separation from anybody who might care about her. She needed connection. So all we all want is connection and acceptance, and the way that we can foster that is just by being there and by being an emotional rock rather than a distancer from children when they're struggling.
It's lovely. Where'd you learn all this? What are some resources you would recommend for people who would like to learn more about these approaches?
Sure. Well, there are a few resources that I love. If somebody is fortunate enough to start their positive parenting journey right from the beginning, as in with a newborn baby, or even better during pregnancy, I started with the Elizabeth Pantley books on sleep, because even things like baby sleep can be gentle processes where we can start the connection process from the very beginning of our child's lives. For older kids, I really like hand-in-hand parenting and Dr. Laura Markham's AHA Parenting. Those are great blogs to follow. Then I've got two more. I really like the books, How to Talk So Little Kids and How to Talk So Kids Will Listen.
All right. That's my favorite.
Yeah, those are fantastic. Some of the very best books I've read. And there is also, if this is more the style that somebody prefers, there is also the best training online that I have ever seen in all the parenting training I've ever done. And it is from the Raffi Foundation for Child Honoring. And it really takes the whole child into view and different ways that we can honor children and raise them in a world that will treat them respectfully and help us grow as parents and caregivers as well.
The Raffi Foundation, from the I was going to say famous, maybe infamous to some people, depending on how loud the music's playing, the singer.
Exactly, yes. He is a lovely human being who sings about whales and all sorts of other great creatures.
I'll link to all those things, and I don't know a lot about some of those resources, but I can highly recommend the How to Talk books. Those are really...
Yes, they are among the best I've read.
Yeah, I think so too. And I always tell anyone who I'm sharing that with, there are illustrations in the book. So when I'm giving a book to someone who maybe doesn't have other parenting books or other working with kid books on their shelves, it's like, really 60 seconds of your time, and you can go through these kind of comics that they have in there that show examples of things that we've all dealt with kids of all kinds of ages. And it's like, oh, that is a nicer response.
Exactly. In fact, if somebody likes illustrations and things like that, one other group of resources that is truly phenomenal and takes that same approach with pictures and words are basically all of the books by Drs. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. Those are phenomenal books as well.
Okay. We'll link to all that. Where can we learn more about you and anything that's coming up in your world?
Sure. Well, there's always my website, which I believe you will have shared with everybody, but it's dandelionseeds.com with the hyphen in between. There is another website, dandelionseeds.com. It's not me. I'm the one with the hyphen. And just follow the blog. And I'm on all the social media, of course. So you can look me up there. And I also do offer individual talking sessions for parents who have specific concerns and want to chat with somebody individually as well.
Great. I'll post links to all that and try to send some people your way. It sounds like you have a lot to offer.
Oh, fantastic. And James, I love that you do this show and that you help foster collaboration between parents and their kiddos.
Yeah, I'm having fun with it. I've really enjoyed talking with you and talking with a lot of great people who are doing good work. So Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you, and likewise. Take care.
All right. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.